All right, let's dive into one of the most fundamental and, frankly, one of the most ruthless laws of power. It's all built on a very simple premise. In pretty much any group, power, and let's be honest, problems, often come from a single source. Law 42 gives us a pretty stark instruction on what to do about that source.
So there it is, the core judgment of the law. Notice it's not about talking things out or finding a compromise. Nope, it's about identifying that one person, the one who stirs the pot, the arrogant underling, the one poisoning the goodwill, and it prescribes a very clear solution. Get rid of them. The logic is brutally simple. You take out the leader, and the followers just lose their way.
So who exactly is this shepherd we're supposed to strike? Is it just, any old troublemaker? Well, it's a bit more specific than that. The law is really about finding the true center of gravity in any group dynamic. See, the shepherd isn't just some minor annoyance. They're the absolute linchpin. It's their will, their intelligence, or just that magnetic personality that gives the entire group its backbone and its purpose. If you remove them, you don't just solve a little problem, you can literally shatter the group's entire structure.
Now, to see this law applied on a massive scale, we're going to jump back in time to the birthplace of democracy itself. Because the ancient Athenians didn't just practice this idea in secret, they turned it into a public civic duty to protect their whole society.
So after the Athenians overthrew their tyrants, they ran into a new problem. What do you do with these powerful, ambitious people who start putting their own interests ahead of the city's? They understood that just one charismatic person could stir up enough division to tear their fragile new democracy apart. Their solution had to be civilized, yeah, but it also had to be decisive.
And that solution was something called ostracism. Now, this wasn't a criminal trial. You didn't actually have to break a law to get ostracized. You just had to be seen as a threat to the harmony and the stability of the city. It was a purely political tool designed for one thing: removing a disruptive shepherd.
And think about that number for a second. 6,000 citizens had to take the time to write your name on a little piece of broken pottery. This wasn't a king or some small council making a decision. This was a massive, collective judgment from the people themselves, basically saying, your presence is no longer welcome here.
And they weren't afraid to use it on some of their biggest names. I mean, Aristides was a war hero, but people felt he was just too judgmental, too superior. Themistocles was another great general, but he got too arrogant, always reminding people how great he was. These guys were shepherds whose influence had just grown too strong, too self-serving. The whole practice actually ended with this guy, Hyperbolus, who was seen as such a buffoon that banishing him was considered an insult to the honor of being ostracized.
Okay, so let's shift from a big public vote to a much more cunning application of this law. This is a strategic masterstroke by one of the sharpest political players of his time, Pope Boniface VIII. And his target? The strongest voice in Florence, the great poet Dante.
The strategy here was just brilliant. See, Boniface didn't attack Dante or his faction head-on. First, he identified Dante as the shepherd, the one resolute spirit holding the whole opposition together. Then, he created a trap, the supposed peace negotiation, to lure Dante away from his power base in Florence. Once Dante was all by himself, isolated in Rome, his faction, the sheep, lost their leader and were just easily scattered.
So what do all these historical examples show us? Well, they reveal the core strategic principle that makes this law work. It really all comes down to the incredible power of isolation.
And isolation isn't just a one-trick pony. You've got physical removal, right? That's what the Athenians did and what happened to Dante. It's the most direct way. But you can also isolate someone politically, peeling away their allies one by one until they're standing all alone. Or you can do it psychologically, using rumors and insinuation to make the group itself turn on them. The goal is always the same: cut them off from their source of strength.
And in this game, death just means the end of your influence, the total neutralization of your ability to act or command any respect. An isolated leader is, for all intents and purposes, a powerless leader.
And believe me, this strategy works on the grandest scale you can imagine. I mean, look at when Cortez and Pizarro faced the massive Aztec and Incan empires. They didn't get bogged down fighting the huge armies, the sheep. No, they went straight for the shepherds. They captured the emperors, Moctezuma and Atahualpa, and with the head of the empire suddenly gone, the entire body just fell into chaos. These vast empires collapsed almost overnight.
But, and this is a huge but, this law comes with a critical warning. This is not a tool for the weak or for the reckless.
Trying to strike the shepherd when you're in a position of inferiority can, and very often does, backfire catastrophically.
Machiavelli, of course, lays out the rule perfectly here. If you're going to strike, you have to be absolutely sure that your opponent cannot get back up and come looking for revenge. A wounded enemy is often way more dangerous than one you never attacked in the first place.
The case of President Andrew Johnson and General Grant is a textbook example of what not to do. Johnson tried to isolate his really popular general, but he did it from a weak political position. All it did was enrage Grant, who then used that attack to build his own political support and eventually take Johnson's job. The much wiser move? Keep your rivals close, secretly undermine their support base, and you only make your move when they're too weak to fight back.
So the bottom line is this: Law 42 is a finisher's move. It demands overwhelming superiority. If you don't have the power to see the attack all the way through to the end, you are way better off not attacking at all, because you just risk turning a rival into a mortal enemy who is now completely focused on your destruction.
And that leaves us with one last question to think about. This whole law assumes that if you remove one person, the whole group will just fall apart. But does that give too much credit to the leader and maybe not enough to the followers? In any group, where does power really reside? It's something to think about.